I hate the fact that I have this book to hold up in this video because I should have given it away 3 years ago when my friend was struggling with his own spiritual emergency. There was a moment when he was in this room, he'd unexpectedly showed up in the middle of a chaotic period in his life, very scattered, very violent energy collapsing inwards, and he saw this book over there on that shelf. And he pulled it out and said, "Ooh, spiritual emergency. I bet that's interesting," and for some bloody reason, I didn't tell him to take the book with him, and 3 weeks later he killed himself on the train tracks. Spiritual awakening and spiritual emergency is no joke, and there is tragically little information for the person who feels like their awakening has become a chaotic crisis. So today I'm going to be making a video which is exceptionally close to my heart to not only recommend this book, but recommend 4 more books that will help you to navigate your own spiritual awakening, mystical revelation, spiritual intelligence, spontaneous rising, whatever you want to call it, without teetering over into schizophrenic, delusional, ungrounded, unstable energy. If I'm being aggressive in this video, it's because I regret the fact that I didn't give this book to my friend in need, and I know now what I could have done for him when I didn't know back then. So if you're in that moment right now, or you know someone who's in that moment where they need a bit of education about the spiritual awakening process, they're seeing demons, they're seeing entities, they're having these incredible night terrors or any kind of symptom like that, this is a video that I want you to share with them. There's 5 books in this video, but the fundamental framing for today comes from Peter, who asked, "Hey Jordan, what would be your advice to someone who has had a spiritual awakening now for about a year, but is leaning more towards the schizophrenic side? How can I avoid these pretty irrational thoughts and experiences, even hallucinations? Am I doing something wrong? Should I take a step back and slow down?" What a great level of awareness. How many people even pause to say, should I take a step back and slow down? Very refreshing. He knows what he needs. Rest of the question. I'm 28, so you'd think if I had schizophrenia, it would already be in full swing, but I never had these types of experiences before. Tell you what, Peter, I have a massive respect for this question because it is such a grounded approach to unlocking your spiritual intelligence without becoming a floaty, dissociative, schizophrenically trapped individual. It's very tempting when we get that first breakthrough, either through years of meditation, maybe some kind of unstructured psychedelic or plant medicine ceremony, or maybe even just a spontaneous awakening in nature one day. It's very tempting to pursue that flight as much as you can. People get trapped in ritual space for years. They're stuck in the liminal roundabout where their feet rarely touch the floor. And I don't want Peter to be in this situation. I don't want you to be in this situation. I want you to have a feeling of being earthy and grounded and solid, having a mature ego identity, having a sense of purpose in the world, a name, a place, a reason to exist. And then, from that place, going deeper into the essence of your soul, swimming in the ocean of God, opening up to the universe, whatever you want to call it. I want you to have both, because you need to have both, because it is a ticking time bomb of schizophrenic delusional territory if you don't put your feet on the earth and have a mature ego that can handle all of that extra inflow of information. It's going to be a really short video. It's going to be a tight video. It's going to be a condensed message. Let's go into the books first. I've ordered them in terms of difficulty and accessibility. We've got 5 books, and once more, if you haven't seen my Dark Night of the Soul video, I will be linking it at the end of this video, because that is an even more intense video than this one that I'm making now. It's easy to find. It's a black and white thumbnail. First book, Spiritual Emergency, by Stanislav Grof as the editor. Second book, Trials of the Visionary Mind, by John Ware Perry. Third book, A Transpersonal Psychology, Healing the Split, and as you can see from that subtitle, John Nelson knows the importance of integrating spirit into mental illness. Fourth book, getting towards the academic now, Embodied Spirituality in a Sacred World, by Michael Washburn. And the final book, which is fantastic for anyone who's consuming too much digital information and has too many lopsided Celebratory stories of spiritual awakening and New Age ideas around entities and starseeds and light workers and crystals and chakras and auras and again and again and again. You better know what you're heading into. So I recommend that you read a book like New Age Religion and Western Culture by Wouter Hanegraaff, which is a systematic deconstruction of the entire New Age space based on 2 years of relentless research, studying 60 years of the New Age movement from its development in the, well, if you go all the way back to esotericism in the late 1800s, you move it all the way through, and this really is incredibly useful. But the reason I'm holding these books up is that the number one principle, in addition to being grounded on this earth and reversing what Peter described as this schizophrenic leaning, is to have an education about what it means to have a mystical experience. The reason that these books are literally life-saving for someone who's going through very chaotic experiences and they search, am I awakening spiritually, is that they will not be pulled down a rabbit hole of Kundalini rising or their divine masculine, divine feminine awakening journey, because those things sell on the internet because they're very clickbait heavy, they're very larger than life. It's almost like a romantic fantasy of your true spiritual self that you're falling in love with. If you just slow it down and look back towards the tradition, the history, the lineage, and you ground yourself in that perspective first, before going into ideas around Kundalini, star seeds, and global consciousness awakening, and quantum mechanics and fractal geometry, you're going to be so much better off. Infinitely better off. Because you're not going to fall for the hype. You're not going to fall for the cheerleaders who are cheering you on as you go through your spiritual awakening. Everyone's clapping in the circle as you're going through a schizophrenic breakdown because they think it's a healing moment where your past life is coming through and giving you all the energy that you lost last time round from the tragic witch hunt. That might be true, but if that's still going to be true, it will be true in several months' time after you've grounded yourself in a deeply educational experience which normalizes the very shimmery, very exciting and ecstatic experiences of glimpsing a past life or having some kind of conversation with God. I know this firsthand because I've been through this journey. At the very beginning, it feels like the first time that you hear your soul voice is truly the most beautiful sound that you could hear. You start to feel the presence of love and godliness reverberating through your body. But what happens the next day when you wake up and you're back in your identity? I'm once more regular Jordan. I'm not some larger-than-life, spiritually imbued, cosmic being who's having a human experience. I'm just an earthy man. That's where the schizophrenic break starts to begin. It doesn't mean that you are schizophrenic, but the break from reality which defines schizophrenia is a world of delusion, fragmentation, and dissociation. I've got many books in this room about schizophrenia, dissociation, and fragmentation, and the number one essence I can summarize is that the person suffers from this when they don't have a mature, grounded identity which is loved and accepted by both themselves and other people. It's the isolated individual which is most at risk of schizophrenic-style delusions and hallucinations, and if you take several 100,000 of those individuals and throw them onto YouTube and call it the spiritual space, well, you get a shared collective paranoid or overly optimistic fantasy of what's actually happening at a deeper level, which is a trauma cleansing process. There is such a thing as a spiritual awakening, but a spiritual emergency is when you're not realizing that the trauma that's coming through from the base coming upwards is not to be confused with this larger-than-life godly energy which feels like it's pouring downwards. Yes, you may be experiencing demonic visions that Dante described in his epics, and you might be seeing the entities which are plaguing humankind. But maybe it's more likely that your unconscious mind is producing fantasies and symbolic images based on the unresolved trauma from your childhood. Maybe it's more likely that the feeling of hostility and unsafety and fear that you have because your father was an aggressive man, or your mother was a cold and critical woman, or there was a certain horrific experience which no one should go through in your childhood, maybe that's getting disjointedly translated with this new spiritual awareness into the plaguing entities which are haunting your dream space. It's a really, really difficult place to be in, but if you don't know what might be happening from a trauma-informed spiritual perspective, which is particularly argued in this book, Healing the Split, I'd say it's one of the best academically leaning, most practical ways of dealing with people who are going through a spiritual emergency. I highly recommend it. I wish I had have read this book probably 4 years ago. I only discovered it in the last few months. I'm glad I can recommend it to you now. You need to basically have an understanding that trauma will tint all perceptive experiences. This is why you hear so many stories coming out of medicine circles and plant medicine ceremonies and psychedelic journeys where people are seeing all kinds of entities. Sure, they may be seeing an entity. There may be such a thing if we were to go there. I'm not saying there is, I'm not saying there isn't, as an entity which attaches to your heart chakra and needs to have an energetic cord cleansing by the shaman. But that's quite disempowering if you are then existing in a reality where you need to be constantly saging yourself and making sure your chakras are completely aligned on a day-by-day basis, or you're going to be instantly hit by the next kind of reptilian vampiric attack. It creates such paranoid, disempowering environments for someone to exist inside mentally, and I cannot encourage it. I wish that people had read at least these 5 books and educated themselves about what the spiritual awakening process is, rather than making YouTube videos about the 10 signs of spiritual awakening and encouraging people once more, like the cheerleaders, cheering someone up the mountain that then becomes a cliff and they drop to their death, because I know what it feels like firsthand to lose a friend who didn't know how to bring himself off the edge of that cliff. I feel the rage. I feel the sadness. I can't hold it back on a video like this, and I do regret. Several times a month I will think about this when I see this book. That shouldn't be in my library. He should have got that book. It might have made the difference. If you're feeling triggered, like I am right now, that's the real pain of the mismanaged spiritual emergence experience. And I know I got there, or close to there, myself. I don't know how much more I can say on a video apart from keep your feet on planet Earth, develop a sense of responsibility for people who are around you and who you love. You are much less likely to float off into dissociative schizophrenic space if you look after your family, your friends, your loved ones, and maybe have a job or a career where you show up for people on a weekly basis. You're less likely to get self-indulgent and you will be anchored into a community. But just make sure, if you're spending a bit too much time in communities which are going all the way out there, and there seems to be a plant medicine journey or a psychedelic experience every other week, just sit down and check with yourself if this is really the next experience that you need. Do you really need another journey like that? Or maybe is it time to go and see what people who've spent decades studying these spaces, working clinically with individuals who've gone too far, might have to say about precautions and safety before venturing without a tether. You want to make sure that you're anchored towards something, so that if you imagine you've got, a strap around you and there's a bungee cord, you're not going to go all the way there before being pulled back. And sometimes people go off the deep end and they end up on the train tracks. I refuse to let that happen to you. Please pick up these books, and at the very least, if you're going to want to watch another YouTube video, I'm going to link my Dark Night of the Soul video, which has 9 books recommended. Some of these are crossing over, but I'll say the same thing that I've said in this video from a different angle, and hopefully it will go through. I care about you. I want you to get through this, and if you know someone who's going through an experience like this, just take the advice of grounding and educating. Simple 2-stage process, and live it every day. It will definitely help, and you've got this. Here's the video on the Dark Night of the Soul.